Thank you for the kind introduction. Good morning from San Francisco, but afternoon and evening as applicable to the rest of you, given that this is such an international crowd, and nice to see a number of friends among the speakers and the audience. So pleasure to be here to discuss the reshaping of industries and jobs. Vast topic. I have 20 minutes for it, but let me give you a few impressions. Firstly, let's remember what we have in front of us with AI. This is a general purpose technology, GPT, a very select club of technologies, which counts among its members the steam engine, electrification, personal computing. Those are technologies that meet three characteristics in the eyes of economists: rapidity of improvement, pervasiveness, and capacity to support complementary innovations. But they are technologies that profoundly rewire entire economies. AI is arguably actually even more profound than that, in that it may be, in the words of the late economist Nicholas Crafts, an IMI, so the invention of a method of invention. So not just a singular breakthrough in time, but a breakthrough in breakthroughs. Something that allows us to raise research productivity and generate ideas faster in our economies, which would feed straight into total factor productivity growth. So really something quite exciting already from a characteristics perspective. And we know when we examine the micro evidence, and there is a growing heap of rigorous micro studies out there, that we have hit gold. So for example, one randomized control trial that we ran at Google, which essentially looked at the impact of some AI features that we had rolled out internally for our developers, found 21% time savings on enterprise-grade tasks. And these are real-world tasks at Google. They were not in vitro. This was not an artificial lab experiment. 21% time savings on tasks that our developers were accomplishing. So that gives you a sense of how transformative this technology is. So is it going to reshape industries? Well, absolutely. I think that is a given. But now you have to look a little bit at history. These things do not happen overnight. That Bob Solow, Nobel laureate, had this quip in 1987 that the computer age is everywhere except in the productivity statistics. It showed up very clearly a few years later without even the need for squinting. But there is a certain amount of time to diffusion. And so reshaping industries is a process. It's a process that takes reimagination, reinvention. The best parable here goes back to the Industrial Revolution. You have steam engines driving, essentially powering factories. The steam engine sits outside your factory. It sort of powers a shaft in the ceiling that then drives a number of belts that power individual machines, all organized around this shaft. Fantastic. Electricity comes along, you replace the steam engine with an electric motor, you get power that's more even, more reliable, a little bit cheaper, fewer breakdowns. So you already bank a few gains, but that is not the big unlock. So the big unlock happens when you realize that the new technology, electrification in this case, allows you to take power to any part of your factory floor, and that you don't need to depend on that shaft in the ceiling anymore. You can sort of have different stations. One is under maintenance, the other still proceeds, etc. You reorganize your production process. And so that's the reinvention that needs to happen for the big productivity unlock, and essentially what we need to do with AI across our economy. It's going to be exciting to see sector by sector how that happens. And so you might ask, well, what is the driving force that will make that process of reinvention happen? So here we can essentially quote the Adam Smith's invisible hand, as assisted by free market competition, of course, because anybody sleeping on their laurels, whereas their competitors are adopting AI to get the sort of productivity improvements I was mentioning, will very quickly realize that that was not the best idea. And in terms of productivity improvements or quality jumps, let me give you a topical example. Google Translate, which is a beloved product. I hope all of you are sort of relying on it. We celebrated 20 years of this fabulous product yesterday. So even more timely example. But it turns out that so Google Translate today translates across about 250 languages. But so a year and a half, we added about half of those languages in one fell swoop, so one big update, and that was because of AI. So that had allowed us to unlock that very massive product improvement. So this is just one sort of single example, but imagine that sort of productivity unlock, that sort of quality jump in a product in any given industry. Your competitor does it, you don't. How is market share going to shift? So essentially, it's not a time to sort of sleep on your laurels, because this is a technology that has a lot of potential to, essentially lead to these paradigm shifts across many industries. And so in terms of reshaping industrial structure itself, it's also going to be, I think, an exciting time for economists, because I'm going to take you back to the theory of the firm. So why do we even have firms in the first place? So this goes back to insights by Ronald Coase, a Nobel laureate, who essentially, let me tell you the story a little bit. Why don't we just wake up in the morning and all of us, we sort of secure the labor we need for the day, the raw materials we need for the day, etc., on spot market transactions in the market? So the answer, of course, is that there is a benefit to bringing economic activity under one roof, where you can make sort of long-term capital allocation decisions and sort of strategic decisions. And so that's the space of the firm. But at some point, the firm ends and the sort of efficiency of the market takes over. But that boundary between the firm and the market is not set in stone. It can fluctuate over time, and indeed fluctuate based on technological evolutions. And one exciting thing about AI is that it may help recalibrate that boundary in a number of cases. So I'll tell you, this is already something that my predecessor Hal Varian and I had observed and worked together on in prior waves of digitization. So Hal coined the term micro multinationals, because essentially he had observed that with the advent of personal computing combined with the internet, he was starting to see SMEs, companies with just a handful of people that were born global from day one. So he called those micro multinationals. An example we had was a company whose engineering was in Ukraine, whose management was in France, and whose finance department was in Silicon Valley. They had less than 10 employees, but they were global from day one. And so that same phenomenon that you have examined, or that we have sort of found in prior digitization waves, I feel is going to go on steroids now with the AI, because AI just makes small structures much more capable than before. And so it may give rise, speculation, but it may give rise to what I call the lean corporation. So to some extent, AI natives that are quite nimble at quite small scale. And so it has a little bit of a promise of reinvigorating business dynamism in a number of countries, including my own over here in the US. So watch this space. It's a hypothesis for now, but I think it's right on trend versus what we have seen before. So that was just a comment on industrial structure. But again, all of this takes diffusion. All of the sort of things I've mentioned at the moment is largely potential to be realized, because if you look at the statistics, we are still in the early innings of this transformation. So a lot of the movie still remains to be played out. Things are going fast, certainly. So this is a technology that's now been adopted by 40% or so of American workers to some degree. So intensity remains a variable that has a lot of room to shift. But 40% adoption, if you compare it with electrification, and I know it's a little bit apples and orangey, but that took 3 to 4 decades in the case of electrification, and in the space of 3+ years, we're now at that kind of stat. Although again, a lot of room for deepening of intensity of usage, because AI now touches about 5% of work hours in the US, based on some work by Alexander Bick, David Deming, and others that was published earlier this month. So you can see that there is a ton of room for growth, really. But it's already got a toehold in our sort of production processes, which is good, but it's an uneven toehold. So Sundar, in a podcast a few months ago, said that you are going to get a JI, artificial general intelligence, before you get a GI, artificial jagged intelligence, before you get artificial general intelligence. So jaggedness is a sort of part and parcel of the story here. So jaggedness, not only across adoption between firm sizes. So you see that SMEs are under adopting compared to larger structures. Not a surprise, because in prior technological waves, we had the same finding where SMEs were under adopting cloud, even though technology typically has a leveling of a playing field effect. So it is very much in the interest of smaller structures to seize themselves of the technology. But of course, smaller structures have more reduced means to sort of invest, train, etc. So you find some under adoption. So that is one dimension of unevenness. Another dimension of unevenness is, of course, across sectors, which is also not a surprise from history. But right now, if you look at Census Bureau data, for example, the information sector or professional services, technical, scientific sectors, they're all at about, call it 35% of firms having adopted. Construction is at 10%. These are all sort of US figures. So unevenness across firm size, unevenness across sectors. Again, none of this is super surprising, and AI, of course, is more capable at some tasks than others, and tasks are not uniformly distributed across the economy. Ergo, it's going to be adopted more readily in some parts than others. But it is a noteworthy thing because temporary unevenness is part of the course, but unevenness that endures is a matter that's worthy of policy attention, especially, for example, under adoption by SMEs. So again, keeping our policy hats on, that's one worth monitoring. But let me sort of change tacks and turn to jobs, because I had also been asked to talk about reshaping jobs beyond reshaping industries, and there is going to be a lot of reshaping here. So in a sense, it's the translation into the labor market of what we are going to see in the sort of product markets. So transformation of jobs. The right framework here is jobs lost, jobs gained, jobs changed. There's going to be action in all three categories. Particularly in the last one, where I think the vast majority of jobs in the economy are going to be transformed in some degree by AI. But in terms of the jobs lost, jobs gained dynamic, which is what attracts most attention, if you look at history, technology is routinely a net creator of jobs. So there's many examples here, but I'll cite some research by my excellent colleague, James Manyika, who, when he was in his prior role at the McKinsey Global Institute, did a wonderful piece of research looking at how a number of technological transformations had impacted the US labor market. And to take just one, personal computing, he and his colleagues found that it had destroyed 2.5 million jobs in the US economy. So these are tasks like, or occupations like typewriter manufacturing or clerical jobs. But that it had created over 19 million jobs, in areas like computer manufacturing or analysis roles, for example. And if you let the movie really play long enough, you get to a result which comes from David Otter, MIT professor, and now a technology and society fellow at Google, and I'm pleased to say for part of his time, where he has a famous paper called New Frontiers, where essentially one of the findings was that 60% of employment in the US economy today is in occupations that did not exist 80 years ago. So that's the dynamism of the economy, what it generates, all of this kind of new work. And if you think of new work, there's a big asymmetry when you're at any point in time looking at the sort of labor force, a new technology comes along. It's easy to sort of see, oh, this might be automated away or that might be automated away. The new work is more difficult to perceive, of course, and yet it happens. So web developer, that's a sort of occupation that was recognized by US statistical agencies in the 90s, social media manager 2005, data scientist that was recognized in 2018, and we just added 2025 a forward deployed engineer, which you might actually consider one of the green shoots of employment coming from AI. So TLDR, there is a lot of reassurance from history that things are in equilibrium going to be fine. But you might very well quote Keynes back at me and say that, that's great, but in the long run, we're all dead. And so this is the second sort of policy area I wanted to flag for attention, that there is a transition, to negotiate between where we're at and this kind of famous equilibrium I was, describing based on history. Because we are coming towards a curve at very great speed, since AI is moving fast. And you can take that curve more or less elegantly, depending on how you deploy policy. And I know that Joanna was already sort of touching on those aspects in her talk. So this is one where we should be vigilant, attentive, not cavalier, not just focused on in the equilibrium everything is fine. There is a sort of whole economy mobilization. This is bigger than any given company, entity, etc. It's going to take public-private partnership. If you think of our 2030 workforce, so who is in our 2030 workforce? I mean, that's a time when AI will be even more omnipresent than it is today. Well, 80% of those people are already at work today in G7 economies, more than 80%. So that already tells you that we are going to need to meet people where they're at in terms of upskilling. So that means mid-career upskilling, on-the-job training, it means apprenticeships, and to me, it means public-private partnerships. And that's this kind of mobilization I think we're going to need so that people in our economies have the skills that allow them to on-ramp onto the AI economy, to jump onto these new opportunities that are going to arise and eventually lead to a new version of the daily daughter statistic I was mentioning. But we need to equip people because AI is going to bring a lot of prosperity. It's a very good piece of news, but it will take effort for that to be a shared prosperity. And on that, I very much look forward to the rest of the conversation with this excellent group and you all in the audience.
Well, thank you very much, Fabien. From what I have learned from you, you talked about how AI will impact industry, then talk about its impact on the jobs. Now, actually, it's a good follow-up to what Joanna just said. I would think they are actually we were debating a bit before this, is that maybe this time actually it could be different. Now, previously, we do know history tells us that technology revolutions actually they create more jobs than destroying jobs. But actually, I have a blunt question. Will this time create more jobs for human beings or destroy more jobs for human beings? So that is actually debatable. Maybe this time is not different, but maybe it's different. So, but I think even from the previous presentation, Joanna also suggests that really it depends. So do you really think it's going to create more jobs this time, just like previous technology revolution? Let me briefly ask you this.
Going straight to the key questions here. So I am optimistic. So I am in the corner of humans. I mean, imagine that you sort of enter a time traveling machine and you go back to, I don't know, the 1850s in America when 60% of the population was employed in agriculture. And suddenly you tell them, a world will come when productivity and abundance is such that like many of us will be employed as yoga teachers and baristas and dog walkers. I mean, they would have thought you were insane, and yet it happened. The main difference with AI is that it's coming at us extremely fast, in my view. But there is no end to human ingenuity. So our ability to create, other occupations, etc., for each other is going to be there. And why am I sort of optimistic that not everything is automatable, if you will? So I go back to an observation by economists Ajay Agrawal, Joshua Gans, Avi Goldfarb, who essentially say, when all is said and done, AI is effectively an advance in the statistics of prediction, which is phenomenal. But when you think of decisions in the economy, they are based on two components. There's a prediction component. So if I were to take actions A, B, or C, what are the probabilities of states of a word X, Y, or Z? And here AI is going to be amazingly helpful. It gives you a super calculator to do that mapping. That's wonderful. But there is a second component typically, which is judgment. And that's more what comes from experience, what comes from wisdom. And that's a very human trait. AI at the end of the day is a model of sorts, and you need to understand the sort of complexities, limitations, of the model in different environments. And that sort of human context and thinking of, making the delivery, aligned with essentially what humans will want. Again, that's where our comparative advantage, if not absolute advantage, lies. So see that across the entire economy, and that gives me some degree of optimism.